and see how deep we get. So what do you think we're generally getting wrong about addiction these days?
There's a couple of factors, but the main factor is that we treat addiction as if it's a pure biological issue. We're treating it as if we expose a patient to a drug and voila, they're addicted. And this is on the basis of some early rat studies that were done where they took rats, they put them in a large container, and they took a rat and they dropped it in there, and they offered the rat on one side of the container water, and on the other side they offered it a narcotic. And lo and behold, the rat came running over to the water, drank some water, went over to the narcotic, and realized it was getting something of benefit. It made it feel different. And so it kept drinking the narcotic until it died. And so our basis of theory is rats, humans, exposed to narcotics will continue to use until they die. And that's simply not true. We had this presupposition during the Nixon era when we were closing up the Vietnam War, and we had about 20-25% of members in the armed forces who were using heroin in Vietnam. And Nixon was terrified that when these people came back to the United States, when they were repatriated, they would come back and we'd have zombies in the street. 25% of people would be abusing drugs because obviously they'd been exposed to drugs there, and a quarter of them were using, or more. Some have speculated 40%, but we know it was at least a quarter. And so when he was repatriating them, he was convinced that these people were going to come back, and they didn't know how to handle that. And that's one of the things that delayed the closure of the war, is because they were afraid of all these zombies that were drug addicted. Right. Lo and behold, we repatriated these people, and only 5% of them were addicted. And that's rather unusual because that's the standard rate in the general population. So how is it that you took 25 to 40% of the people abusing and using drugs of significant strength, and they're not addicted when they come back to the U.S., but they were addicted there? And so that posits the question. It's not necessarily that you have availability to the drug. There's more to it. I mean, certainly you have to have availability to the drug to have an addiction to the drug, right. But that doesn't mean that that's what you're doing. So they repeated the rat study, and this is the rat study that people don't look at. They did the rat study, and they dropped a rat into a cage. They made the cage bigger, and now they put some toys in there for it to play with, and they put other rats for it to play with. And they gave the rat the opportunity, narcotic or water. The rat drank the water, drank the narcotic, realized it had friends, quit drinking the narcotic water, ignored it completely, drank the water as it needed, and played with its friends and had sex and ran around mazes and never overdosed, never died. So what that tells you is that it's the social interaction and the integrity of that social interaction that determines the likelihood that that rat is going to try and consume narcotics in a long-term manner. And we see that when I look at patients, and I recognize that we have an international audience that's listening, relatively speaking. And so when I look at the urban core, which is where I practice, we see people standing on street corners in group, but they're really standing in their own silo, and they're out there and they're drug addicted, but they're standing next to each other, but they're not interacting with each other. They just happen to be adjacent suppliers or people that they kind of know, and they mill around, but there's really no tangible linkage between one person or another. And so I think that that's something that we completely have overlooked in addiction, is that it's really the absence of connection to other human beings that promotes the hedonic drive to get out of your head.